Today's learning is the Ilui Nishmas Malka Bashleme. We are in Likutei Moharan Torah base, Sif Gimel, for those who are following along inside. We're going to continue the lesson with a reference to what we've learned before. One that merits to this sword. Before we learn about the person that merits to this sword, we have to recall what this sword refers to. First of all, it is a double-edged sword, as we learned in the previous Sif, Cheref Pefias V'Yadam. V'chinos Shtei Peois. It is a sword with two edges. And what are these two edges in our Avodas Hashem? Well, there's the prayer. And during the prayer, it's good if we have a lot of energy and excitement from the prayer, and that we pray in an energetic way, and that we try to push our prayers to go through all the hungry angels and things that want to have a chelik in our prayers, that want to have a portion of our prayers, and we push and push until they go straight through to HaKadosh Baruch Hu without any interference. So they come through with a clear signal. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can understand, but he likes it when we make a good effort. So that's one side of the sword. That's the revealed side of the sword. And then there's the concealed side of the sword, which is, who are we when we step up to daven, when we step up to pray? And in one way, this is a more significant factor even than how energetic we are during actually the time of prayer. Because this is, first of all, it refers to a much greater piece of time, which is all the rest of the time when we are doing other things besides praying. It says in the Gemara, Halavai Adam Mispala Kalim Kulai, that it would be wonderful if a man would pray all day, but I don't think most of our days necessarily look like that. We may have other activities. First of all, there's a lot of Torah learning probably that happens in a lot of our days, and we might have to go to the grocery store and things like that sometimes too. So there's a lot of time in the day. Probably the majority of time, if you just measure the time in a straightforward minutes and hours sort of way, that contributes to the second edge of the sword, this who we are when we step up to pray, when we step up to go to battle with the Yetzer Hara, with our sword of davenning. And another factor that makes this very significant is that it includes our entire body. Prayer, maybe there's two body parts involved. Essentially, there's primarily we're using our mouth, we're speaking, and also we're using our hearts, hopefully. And essentially, we're using two limbs of the body. But how do we make ourselves a master swordsman, so to speak? At least one of the preparatory steps, as we've discussed, is that the rest of the time when we aren't davening, we avoid nonsense. Sin, we already know about avoiding sin. Nobody intentionally sins, but nonsense surrounds a person and seems basically harmless. It doesn't seem to be a problem if I talk about the news or sports or whatever it is. So why should I refrain from that? And while these things are not energized, yes, they do seem essentially harmless, but we learn a novel teaching from Likutei Moharan that we will become energized in our life. About the heart. That we know that the heart, we know that blood is going to enter the heart. There's the teaching of Likutei Moharan where it says we have to have a hole in our heart, and don't be scared by that idea. We already have two. We have one for the blood to go in and one for the blood to go out. It's essential for a functioning heart. We bless Hashem for this every time we say the blessing of Asher Yetzer Hara, that we have openings and closings in our body for the blood. That's the topic we're discussing now, to go in and out of. So we already have two holes in our heart. Nobody needs to be reminded that to fill their heart with blood. That will happen as an automatic. That happens automatically. And as this corresponds to our day-to-day life, we are going to become excited about something. And I think most of us know that it's good to become excited about prayer. That isn't a novelty so much. The novelty is that we need to have some sort of an outlet for this excitement. And so the outlet is the mitzvahs lo yisaisei, the prohibitions of the Torah, which when we do a positive mitzvah, such as we give someone tzedakah, we're essentially using our hand to give the tzedakah. Now you can say that all the energy and the time that we put into making the money to give that tzedakah, to give that charity, that also is included in the mitzvah, and that's true. But at the moment of the giving of tzedakah, we're using our hand to do it. At the moment of putting the tefillin on our arm, we're putting it on our arm, putting it on our forehead. It's not our whole body. But when we avoid a mitzvah's lo yisaisei, when we avoid eating something we shouldn't eat, or something like that, or engaging in an activity on Shabbos that is prohibited on Shabbos, our whole self avoids that thing. And so there's a uniquely physical element to this second aspect of prayer, of this double-edged sword of prayer. When we step up to the plate to daven, who are we at that time?
Are you saying that the abstaining from a negative mitzvah has a greater positive energy created than doing a positive mitzvah because you're doing the whole body?
We're going to discuss the point of the positive mitzvahs in this lesson, how it fits into this lesson. But with all of these things, positive mitzvahs, negative mitzvahs, Torah and tefillah, Torah and ma'asim tovim, tefillah, any two aspects of the Yiddishkeit, it is beneficial to explore what are the advantages of one over the other, and then the other over this one. So for now, we're discussing the advantage of the negative mitzvahs, the prohibitions, the advantage that they have over the positive mitzvahs, but there also is an advantage of the positive mitzvahs over the negative mitzvahs too. So each have their advantages, and we'll get to that very point here. But there's something very special about the negative mitzvahs, which is that they give us a certain degree of control over the excitement that we harness during the time of prayer. Hopefully it's during the time of prayer. And what does this hold in our heart allow us to do? It allows us to send that energy to Hashem, so that all that excitement is mekudesh. It's for holy purposes only, and not that we should get excited about non-holy. I don't want to say unholy, just non-holy things, regular things. We should approach them in a reasonable way. Fine. So that's all review, and that's all enclosed in the first line of Sif Gimel here in Likutei Moharan, Torah base. The chedule hazeh is the sword, the two-edged sword that we've discussed in sort of a metaphorical way. Sarech leida eich lilchoim im hacherav. Rabbi Nachman says that we have to know how to use this sword. Now this is a little bit difficult because I thought we already knew how to use this sword. We discussed a metaphor before about that when we refrain from not only negative mitzvahs, but also any sort of nonsense that would sort of lead us to negative mitzvahs. This is sort of like learning to wield the sword. The metaphor of prayer is that one can go into prayer and have a very powerful prayer and with good energy and good in concentration. They have in their mind the right ideas, in their heart the right feelings that match the meaning of the words on the page, and they're saying the word of the page correctly, and all this is very good. This is like having a very good quality sword in your hand. It's hard metal, it's very sharp, it's got a good balance to it, things like this. But one also has to know how to wield the sword. This is very important. And so if someone becomes so excited that they start to mess up the words of the prayer, or they become so excited they lose concentration, or they become so excited that they become excited later about other things that do not warrant so much excitement, this is comparable to someone who cuts themselves with their own sword. Especially if someone's going to wield a double-edged sword, it's very important to know what you're doing. So we made the comparison there of lone training exercises. A swordsman will practice various spinning moves where they spin the blade different ways. And this isn't necessarily this is a good fighting move with the sword per se, but it gives them control. The sword swings close to their face but doesn't cut them. And they practice these movements so that they can move in a fluid way with their sword and not cut themselves. But Rabbi Nachman still says, we have to know how to use it. So what does this mean now? I thought we already knew. So we already knew how to practice using the sword. But the purpose of the sword is, well, it's a weapon of war. Rabbi Nachman said before that Iker Kli Zayni of Mashiach is tefillah. The weapon of Mashiach is tefillah. Right? The special sort of davenning the special sort of prayer that we're talking about in this lesson is a prayer that is unique to Mashiach, or I should say that it's special to Mashiach. We all can do it, but Mashiach, that's Mashiach's primary thing that Mashiach does, is this sort of prayer, and that's how Mashiach brings about lasting change in the world. Right? Our prayers can bring about change in the world, and ultimately we want lasting change. So we have a portion in that prayer that leads to lasting change as well. It brings down new energy, not just shuffling around the current pieces, which is good too, as we've discussed. So what is this novel instruction from Rabbi Nachman that we now have to know how to use the sword? If we thought we already knew, we have to know how to use it against a live opponent. He continues, so that we don't go too far to the left or too far to the right. Obviously, we have to not cut ourselves, but we have to cut the right place of the Yetzer Hara also. Now, we might think upon a superficial read that this refers to chesed and gevura. This refers to not being too chesed, not giving to sources that shouldn't be given, are unworthy of giving, not giving energy to things that are unworthy of receiving them, and also not to be too gevura, I'm just going to shut myself off from absolutely everything. We need some balance here. We're going to talk about this very concept of balance, and Rabbi Nachman famously said that man must cross a narrow bridge, which clearly a theme of balance is present in that idea. A bridge has two sides, and you don't want to fall off the bridge, and you want to get to the other side. So this is also a metaphor of cutting in the right place. This is the bridge. But it doesn't only mean chesed and gevura, as we would sort of, in an obvious way, think it means. In the writings of Reb Nosson Zal, who was the primary student of Rabbi Nachman, and also penned all of Rabbi Nachman's books, even the books that are attributed to Reb Nosson Zal said that I never wrote anything original. Everything I said was from Rabbi Nachman. And if you should wonder, well, but there's a lot of text in the books from Reb Nosson Zal that are not in the books of Rabbi Nachman. Well, they had a lot of conversations that we don't really know all what happened in those conversations. So information from those conversations is located in the writings of Reb Nosson Zal. It was just the day of his passing also recently, as well as we announced Ilui Nishmas for someone close to someone in our community here in the beginning of this year. And he writes on this that we should not tilt left or right. Shaloi lahaktim esa ma'uchar, not to jump the gun, not to mess up the timing. So one major difference between dealing with a live opponent and practicing by oneself is timing. A great prize fighter once said, speed, you don't need speed, what you need is timing. Timing beats speed. That if I think only I'm going to go out in the world and I'm going to be very careful that I'm going to be excited during prayer, and the rest of the time I'm going to be very careful that I don't encounter any nonsense, that I don't fall into anything that could lead me to sin. If we were to use the metaphor of a sword fight for this approach of being very careful, if I'm very careful to do all my moves right in an actual sword fight, I'm probably going to not win that sword fight because I'm not accounting for the timing. So what's the metaphor here? We're not actually talking about sword fighting with a real sword, really. We're talking about dealing with the evil inclination. You want to adjust that?
You go ahead.
All right. So when dealing with the inclination, there is an aspect of timing that is going to be involved. And we're going to specify, but what is that aspect of timing? Rabbi Nachman continues, that we should be able to cut to a hair's breadth and not sin. That seemingly is what yechtem means. The simple meaning in the pasuk that comes from in the book of Shoftim is that we should not miss, but that we already kind of have this concept, so we need to look a little bit deeper. Why did Rabbi Nachman bring this statement here? What's the novelty? He doesn't bring anything that we already know. Rabbi Nachman is either making a new novel teaching or he's setting us up for a new novel teaching. So the Targum, really the first explanation to any of the books in Tanakh is the Targum, the translation, wherein the book is translated to Aramaic. And these translations were done in the Tanaic, the early Tanaic era. I believe when the base of Mikdash was still standing. So as we treasure the commentaries of Rashi and the Rishonim, but there is another commentary that we should be aware of that is much, much older than, over 1,000 years older than most of the translations we're more familiar with, which is the Targum, the translation to Aramaic. And because many have the custom some say it's a mitzvah, to read every week the entire parsha with the translation. Because the translation to Aramaic in particular is an important commentary, and one can learn a great deal from this. And the translation there of the word Yechateh is Mishane, that one should not change. One should not change what? What have we described as our sword? That we're excited at the right time, and we're calm and calculating at the right time. So as long as this doesn't change, that's great. So what does the Yetzer Hara want to do? It wants to change when we're excited and when we're calm. A person that doesn't have this ability of being calm and excited at select times, the Yetzer Hara has an easy job. It only has to excite the person, and it may or may not be a good time. And if the Yetzer Hara is doing it, it's probably not a good time. Or the Yetzer Hara wants to cool the person off at a time that they should be excited, probably. But if we already know how to control when we're excited and when we're calm and collected, then it makes the Yetzer Hara's job a little more difficult. But as the previous Rebbe of Chabad described the Yetzer Hara, he's a klugener, he's clever, the Yetzer Hara. So the Yetzer Hara is going to try to mess with our timing. And the way that this works in our conversation is that the Yetzer Hara wants to, now that we have this ability of calm and energized, and it's synchronized with our tefillah, with our davenning, and with our ordinary activities, the Yetzer Hara wants to separate this connection of, it wants to get us to do this calm and energized thing, just shift the timing a little bit. All you got to do is shift the timing a little bit, and then the person's back to their old ways. We said before that the two-edged sword, Rabbi Nachman says, Cherev Pifias B'yadam, it refers to a two-edged sword of davening. And then Rabbi Nachman continues to say, Bechinas te peos, which ostensibly means two blades to the sword, but you can't escape that it also means the hairstyle. And it means the two, I have my peos like this. Some people keep theirs long, some people keep theirs tucked behind their ears, some people short, but it's a mitzvah from the Torah not to cut the hair on the sides of our head too short. And so this is essentially connected to our head here. So the Yetzer Hara wants to disarm us, or another way to say that is the Yetzer Hara wants to cut off our head. So this is comparable to a sword fight here. Our head is our ability to control when we are energized and when we are calm and collected and calculating. And the heart is the excitement itself. It's the thing that we're doing. We feel excitement in our heart more than we feel it in our head. Our head just directs the traffic. So once the Yetzer Hara has seen that our head is doing such an important job, it's doing its job properly. It's relegating our emotions in a healthy way. Then all the Yetzer Hara has to do is chop off the head, separate the head from the heart, in other words, and then the person is back to their old ways. So one has to have good aim not to change, not to be conscious once I've established my energy and my calmness at the proper times, not to let that become an arbitrary thing and to keep it connected to the actual real situation, whether I'm davening, whether I'm going to the grocery store. And then Rabbi Nachman writes, V'zei efshar, that's impossible. Ella, al yedei b'chinas mishpat. So what gives us the ability to prevent the Yetzer Hara from cutting off our head? A thing called Mishpat. And what does Mishpat mean? Here's a commentary from Yaakov Emden, a great Ashkenazic authority. He writes on Perkei Avos the following: Mishpat hu klal hamitzvos ma'asiois. The word mishpat is a collective word to refer to all positive mitzvahs. We have primarily discussed so far negative mitzvahs. They don't do this, but we haven't talked so much about positive mitzvahs, besides in sort of a giving them certain second fiddle sort of way. As Shlomo asked about why I was saying that, when we give tzedakah, we only give with one hand, we give with a hand. Are we playing down positive mitzvahs here? Chas v'shalom. We're going to say now what's the role of positive mitzvahs as it pertains to a discussion here in Likutei Moharan base. So the word mishpat refers collectively to the positive mitzvahs. And what's the proof of Hashem? Because many times in the Torah, Yaakov Emden says, I don't have examples here before me, but many times the word mishpat is used to refer to a positive mishpat, a positive mitzvah. So, one fundamental difference between mitzvos ma'asos and mitzvos loitaisim is time. That mitzvahs ma'asos are inherently more involved in time than mitzvahs loisaisim. There's a certain time every day that I put on tefillin. I don't put it on at night. There's a certain time that I say Kriya Shema in the morning and the night. I have to say it before a certain time, and the night one I have to say it after a certain time. The mitzvahs ma'asos, many of them are time-bound specifically. Mitzvahs loisai say there are time-bound mitzvahs loisai say, but let's take a very classic example that we shouldn't eat a cheeseburger. That's a known thing. The Jews are not supposed to eat cheeseburgers. And so when am I not supposed to eat a cheeseburger? Is there a specific time? I can't do it on Tuesday or something? No, it's all the time. Anytime that a cheeseburger pays for it, my job is to simply not eat it. Right? And then I have a mitzvah. So it has nothing to do with time, really. It does use my whole body in that way, in that my whole body abstains from the cheeseburger. Whatever you eat. I mean, you are what you eat. So source recently that said that in Torah. You are what you eat. And so if we avoid the negative mitzvah of eating a cheeseburger, we've used our entire body in that. But it's not brought into time. And time is a very important concept because most of us live within time. We've discussed the idea that there are questions that in Breslov it's advised that one not pursue existential sort of questions. Why is it like this? What do I do? It would be a more practical. What's the din here? It would be a more practical question, a more helpful question, a not maddening question. But what is about questions that don't seem to be helpful immediately that makes them harmful for me to ask? That they can be answered, you would just need infinity time to do it. It would be outside of time. There's a famous story of the Arizal that he was sleeping and his lips were moving while he was sleeping. And one of his students, he's telling great secrets there. And he crouches by, he puts his ear right by the Arizal's lips and he tries to hear what he's saying, and it wasn't so clear from that. So when the Arizal wakes up, he asks him what he said. The Arizal was asleep for maybe 15 minutes. It was a short nap. The Arizal says to him, it would take me 70 years to tell you what I was saying. And it was like some sort of a prophetic dream I was having. So great tzaddikim can see things above time, and then they can bring them down into lessons that we can within time understand. And it's very important that we function well within time, especially here because we see that the Yetzer Hara uses time as a tool against us. So we need to also be aware of how time operates here. And mitzvahs ma'asos, they pattern our day. I mean, you look at the regular schedule of a religious Jewish man, and there are certain specific times that he has to pray, and every Shabbos he has to go and he has to put on the tefillin at a certain time, and there are all these things that happen at certain times.
What he's saying is that it's the positive mitzvahs that allows you to maintain the right amount of energies up and down through the day, because they're time bound.
Well, the positive mitzvahs of himself would not allow us to do that. The positive mitzvahs by themselves, someone could do positive mitzvahs and they have a regular schedule, but the schedule isn't helping them as long as they don't yet have control over when they're excited and what excites them and what cools them. So we have to learn first, that's the idea of the double-edged sword, is that the mitzvahs lois, I say, give us, essentially self-control, and also the sort of maybe more Hasidic step of not only avoiding prohibited things, but avoiding sort of nonsensical things, that if I were to get excited about nonsensical things, it could lead me to sin.
But isn't that the sentence that he's saying? It's impossible to keep this level of the right level of energy unless you're in the area of positive mitzvot. Isn't that what he's saying?
Yeah, so the positive, but this is Sif Gimel here. So we've learned before that we have to have the mitzvahs loisais to give us this ability to regulate our ups and downs in the first place. Then the Yetzer Hara comes, and we have to not be Yate Oisei Liyamin Ismail Shei Koileya Esasayra V'lo Yachate. And the Targum says, loy mishane, not to change. So once we've established that I get excited about the right things in prayer, and I don't get excited, I can go to the grocery store and act like a normal person. I don't get too excited. I don't get really furious when I'm in a traffic jam. It doesn't warrant that sort of energy. It warrants like being safe, and it would be a good time to have a conversation with Hashem, as long as I'm still paying attention to the road enough that I can drive safely. So,
I guess he's saying that it's only in the positive mitzvah that you can actually express your enthusiasm.
Yeah, the positive mitzvahs give us a schedule. This is the point here. The Yetzer Hara wants to, once we've established the head and the heart, when I'm going to get excited about the right things and not excited about the wrong things, then we need, the Yetzer Hara is going to try to shift the timing so that maybe it's before we daven or after we daven a little bit that this excitement remains. And maybe we'll go into davening cold, or we'll, at the end of the davening, when we start saying Aleinu, it says, you're supposed to say Aleinu with great concentration and awe and power. It says in Halacha that you're supposed to do that, but it's very easy to get tired by Aleinu. See, that's the Yetzer Hara, bringing in the coolness early, shifting the timing a little bit. So Mishpat, the positive mitzvahs, gives us a seder. It brings us into time. It gives us a lock time so that the Yetzer Hara, we have a shield to protect us against getting shifted a little bit by the Yetzer Hara's attempt to shift their schedule. Ki Mishpat hu amud de emseisa. Now we see a term in Kabbalah here. That Mishpat is the center column.
Tiferet.
Right, Das, Tiferet, Yisoid, Malchus. Actually, within Tiferes is divided in Rachamim and Mishpat. That there's a side of Tiferes that's a little bit more on the side of Chesed and a side a little bit more on the side of Gevura. So we'll get into that concept a little bit here. I'm going to take another commentary here on this idea of the Amud de Emsa Isa. Here it is. Where does this phrase Amud de Emsa Isa come from? What language is that? It's Aramaic. It comes from the Zohar, the Kunei Zohar. He said Amud de Emsa Isa. One of the famous commentaries on the Zohar, Shari Oire, explains the following: Kvar Yedaita, you already know. Ki Mishpat hu kalul b'din v'rachamim. The Mishpat has within it din and rachamim. Has the two sides, Chesed and Gevura, that is in the middle. Ki ha-Mishpat keneged Yaakov shehu kav ha'emsai. Because Mishpat corresponds to Yaakov, he's the third of the Avos. Avraham was very much on the side of Chesed, and Yitzchak very much on the side of Gevura. And then we find our balance with Yaakov, and Yaakov gets the name Yisroel, which is where we get the name Yisroel. Bnei Yisroel, sons of Yaakov, are called Yaakov specifically.
Why is Dafka Mishpat the middle, though? He's saying it's Yaakov. Why is Dafka Mishpat Yaakov?
Because the Zohar says Mishpat Amud de Emsa Isa. That's
the source of it.
Zohar is sort of Torah shebichsav. There's a Rambam where he says you should split a third of your time Torah shebichsav, Torah shebal and I think he says Gemara, meaning like Sfar, maybe Talmud. And there's different explanations on what this means. The explanations on what Torah shebichsav refers to is that it includes source material in Kabbalah as well as Mikra, like books of Tanakh. So I'm justifying my answer to the why is Mishpat in the middle, because the Zohar says, because that's what we're basing all this whole thing off of. So why Yaakov is in the middle? I mean, this is clear. He's the third one. So you just stray too far, then you stray the other way. No, I'm not saying Abraham's too far, but saying you set up one side, you set up the other. You can't have a middle if you don't have two sides first. Middle compared to what? Okay. So Kavim Sai Shehu Hamisayim Ben Shnei Oilim Shehem Avraham Yitzchak. And Misayim, like to match Milesh Misayim and Mechaber, connect. So Yaakov is his own guy. He's not just a combination of Avraham and Yitzchak. Mishpat, what's in the middle? It's not just like you stick the left and the right together and you get Mishpat. That's sort of where we were before, which is that I have the time when I'm excited and that's good, and I have the time when I'm not excited and that's good, and I have the time when I'm calm and that's good. But then Mishpat seems to be like, well, it's just a combination. As long as I get these two things right, I don't need anything else besides that. Yeah, but the Yetzer Hara is smarter than that. It'll try to mess that up. So what holds it in place? What is mechaber? What connects these things so they don't shift around and they stay in the proper places? Is Mishpat. So there is a detail in Kabbalah of the Shlah. The Shlah is one of the great Kabbalists. He was maybe 100 years after the Rizal, something like that.
He's buried with Tiberia.
Right? And the Shlah, he says that let's divide all reality into two parts. There's the worlds of lies, which refer to the lower three worlds of Bia, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, and the world of truth, Atzilus. And what's the difference? So it seems like in the three worlds that Chochmah, everything comes out of Chochmah. That from this little point of everything, and essentially we have this sort of top-down reality. If only I could explain it right to this guy, then he'd get it straight. And I think a lot of us think that. If only the people who disagree with me, if only heard what I had to say, it would go in their head and then it would sink down and go into their heart. But, oh, by the way, before I say but, this is what we've discussed so far. In the first Likutei Moharan, we said, don't look at the Chesed and Gevurah things first. Do I like it? Do I not like it? First, look at the Chochmah. Well, what is it first? Before I, Koyach Ma, power of what? Before I make any sort of judgments on it. Then I can make judgments. It's okay. But first, so we're not bashing this idea by saying that it's from the world of lies. Look, we live in the lowest world here, and we know a lot of things around us are not as they appear. But in Atzilus, in the world of truth, if one could see into that world, well, things are as they appear. It's the world of truth there. So the Shlah says, here's the difference. In the world of Atzilus, in the world of truth, everything comes out of Tiferes. It starts in the middle and it spirals out. It's not this top-down sort of trickle-down effect. And so we see in the world of Atzilus, in the world of truth, a unique capacity in which Tiferes is actually, Mishpat is actually really its own thing. That Mishpat is what produces the two sides. We spoke before about the idea of a bridge being, well, there's two sides first, and then I have to have a bridge between them in order for me to get to the other side. But if you actually if you zoom out a little bit and look a little closer at the reality of the situation, well, before there was just a chasm and there was no left or right. Just the whole thing was bad. The whole thing is that I fall, like if I walk and take a step further, I fall in the chasm. That doesn't work. So until I build a bridge, there's not a left and a right. Until I see that there is a point of truth, there is a God Almighty, there is a Tzaddik Emes, there is something ultimately worth striving for, whether I can achieve it or not. It's beyond maybe what I can achieve, but that makes it so okay. So I can achieve things along the way. You shoot for the moon, you land among the stars kind of idea. Once I have that and I connect with that, now I've established my bridge. And so how do I lock that bridge in place? So this bridge is called Mishpat, and it's actually what produces the sides. Because I have a regimen, because I have a specific time that I pray, and a specific time that I learn Torah, and because I have a specific time that I do other sorts of things, and these are all brought down in Halakha, how these specific times exactly work out, what our schedule ought to be like. The religious Jew lives a very scheduled life, at least the religious Jewish men anyway. One other concept, by the way, about why mitzvahs ma'asis are more in time, where we need to operate here, than mitzvahs loisai. Even though you say there are mitzvahs loisai that are within time, such as Shabbos, well, we see that with mitzvahs aseh, there's a distinction between men and women, that men are obligated in mitzvahs aseh shezman geramahu, that are time bound, such as tefillin, and women don't have to put tefillin. But mitzvahs loisai, even zman geramahu, like Shabbos, for the duration of Shabbos, we can't make fires and build stuff. Everybody's obligated in that equally. And this time distinction does not exist by mitzvahs loisai. It only exists by mitzvahs aseh. So we see that there is an increased time relationship with mitzvahs aseh. And it's not only that mitzvahs aseh, that the schedule that this makes gives us this ability to not have the timing shift so that we're getting excited at the wrong times and things like that. But actually, that's what allows us to get it right in the first place. That the fact that if I'm going to get excited about my prayers, I have to have a certain time that I pray. If I'm going to be calm and collected about my sort of other, not specifically prayer activities, I have to have certain times that I do that. If I'm doing business while I'm in Shul davening, it's very hard to know what to get excited about. So thankfully we have laws about davening that I can't make interruptions during certain times in the davening, because when I'm davening at that time, that's the time that I'm davening. And so the advantage of mitzvahs loisai is that they give us this ability to control our ups and downs. The advantage of mitzvahs aseh is that they keep these things regulated. But actually the whole thing comes from the mitzvahs aseh in the first place. Our ability to have proper ups and downs comes from mitzvahs aseh in the first place. That's what it means. Ki mishpat hu amud de isa. And when we see amud de isa, well, we already sort of have that idea in place of this middle. We already talked about that we need to know how to use the swords, so it doesn't go to the sides too much, so we can cut exactly in a hair's breadth, and not to miss, not to change. So what do we need to know amud de isa for? Because amud de isa is a Kabbalistic way of saying it. And when we're talking about things in a Kabbalistic way, we have to consider the world of Atzilus, the world of truth. There's an angel there's an angel that presides over the lower three worlds, the worlds of Sheker, and this angel corresponds to the Mishnah, which essentially is a legal document, and all of the laws that cause us to regulate our time within the material world. And once you go above that angel, once you're not just talking about law anymore, and now if you say something in a Kabbalistic way, now you have to account for Atzilus, and maybe some of that's where paradigm shifts sort of come from. Something that enters into the lower three worlds from Atzilus is something that is truly novel. Something that enters from a higher lower world to a lower world, it's not really so novel. It's just like sort of moving the pieces around. As we've discussed, our regular prayers of Avodas Berudim, we move the plenty from bad places to good places, and hopefully it stays there for a while. But we need this sort of we need this paradigm shift that we get from Atzilus, which is that the left and right are actually produced by the center. That our ability to maintain our ups and downs, we shouldn't denigrate mitzvahs aseh because they're actually the source of that. Do you have any questions?
Well, it suggests that because we understood that the right and the left rather, have to be for Tiferet in order to create the middle ground.
Right, in the lower three worlds, we think that.
Yeah, and yet you're saying that it's independent of the.
It's its own thing. In the lower three worlds, we can improve ourselves by thinking that the left and right produce the center. But ultimately, we won't be able to maintain that improvement. It's like the idea that two ideas that we've discussed, that our prayers of avodas berurim affect a positive effect, but not necessarily a lasting positive effect. Where the prayers of Mashiach that have this sort of double-edged sword to them that actually bring something new from the world of Atzilus into the lower world produces a lasting effect. And we've also discussed the idea that within our personal avodah that we get excited during davening and we get not excited during business. We get calm and calculated during business. And as long as this stays how it is and we don't disconnect these feelings from these specific times, we're good. But as soon as that dynamic starts to shift, now the improvement, we wind up backtracking. So this is where we need the novel understanding of Mishpat, Amuda de Emsi Isa from the world of Atzilus, that no, actually Mishpat is the source of left and right.
And this idea that the Shaitan uses timing to get us, I mean, is that a more effective way for him to get us than to get us to do the wrong things? Like, there's one thing to do, do the right thing at the wrong time.
Right.
But is that more effective for the Satan than?
It's just different levels. The Yetzer Hara doesn't need to use that technique at first with someone who doesn't yet have control over what they get. They just get excited when they get excited, and it sort of comes over them, or they get cooled off when they get cooled off. They get tired, and then they're cooled off, and it just comes over them. The Yetzer Hara doesn't need to mess with timing with that person. It just shows them something that they shouldn't have, and if it doesn't get them, then it shows them some nonsense first. Again, it's like a sword fight. First, the Yetzer Hara just swings the sword, and if that doesn't work, probably it doesn't work. Probably the person moves out of the way or blocks it. Then the Yetzer Hara is going to kind of swing the sword around a little bit to mess with you. That's the idea of the nonsense, and then it'll come in with its attack. And until someone has figured out how to not be distracted by the nonsense, the Yetzer Hara doesn't need to play with timing particularly. Once the Yetzer Hara sees, this guy knows when to swing and when to block, and these things, then it's going to, I'm coming at you, but a little slower than you thought, or I'm coming at you, and it's faster than you thought, and that's when we need to become a master of time. And that's the Mishpat.
So it's a compliment to you if the son is using time.
Yeah. That's a nice thing to say. Huh? At every level, it says in I think it even says in the Mitzvot. You might say in the Gemara in Yuma that between every level of heaven, all the progressively higher levels, is the river Dinor, which is like a river of fire. There's like new challenges that are associated with every level. Once we step up and we start davening, we start pronouncing all the words with a full voice, we realize, I've been making a lot of mistakes I didn't realize I was making when I was whispering my tefillahs. I'm nothing but Shemini Esrei, Pesukei Dezimra, the parts of davening that it's nice to say loud. It's good to say it loud, and it is a step up, even if we start making mistakes, because we were making those mistakes before. We just covered it up by the fact that we were quiet. So the fact that we're making those mistakes is also like it's like a compliment. It's like, okay, good, you're welcome to the next level. It's like during a Marish year, the first time the Maggid Shir throws you a Toys place. Like, okay, now you get to stumble. You're doing great with Rashi. Now try Toys place. It seems like you're tripping up, but actually it's a compliment. It's just going to the next level. The new challenges associated therewith.
Very good. Shkoyach.
I have some questions off the record.
Do you want it on the tape or not?
If he wants to read off the record,
is it relevant
then
to the learning or different?
About
if it's about the shir, if you don't mind, we keep it on the camera. Unless it's up to you.
I don't. You would hear one question and then you'll understand what I'm talking about.
Okay.
It says clearly in the Shulchan Aruch, when the Aaron is open on Shabbat,
Yeah.
from that time on there is no talking.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of people that I know they know they're doing wrong, but they do it anyway. And they do it without fail every Shabbat. And it becomes annoying and more than that, disrespectful. And I don't know these people by name, and I have actually considered going up there and pointing out in the book.
Right.
You're actually not supposed to be talking, and I'm not even sure they speak English, but Pretty confident if I did, it wouldn't go well.
Right, okay. So there's a few things to say about that. That's not different than any other sort of prohibition. Let's just say that falls under the category of people doing prohibition. So there's three things. One is there's also halacha, and you have a good sense to know if they won't be taken well, because we're not supposed to correct people. There are very few exceptions to this if they're not going to receive it,
Yeah.
because then they're doing it with a warning. Right? It's better that they do it without a warning than they do it with a warning. If you think somebody's going to take your pasak, then it is good to correct them, as long as you do it in a non-embarrassing way. That also is halachically mandated, that it be done in a non-embarrassing way. But so it is good to refrain if you don't think that, oh, here is what you have to say. But maybe you mention it to the Rav of the Shul or the Gabbai or something. The people would be more receptive to what the Rav of the Shul or the Gabbai say. That's one thing. What you want to do with the camera, if you want to keep it on or turn it off.